For months, the object had been nothing more than a faint blot of light, another frozen traveler from the dark between stars. Astronomers called it Three-Eye Atlas, a poetic name for what they assumed was just an ordinary comet, cold, predictable, and harmless. It drifted through the void with the obedience of gravity itself, its motion traced neatly across black skies. Every equation agreed. Every orbit matched expectation. In the symphony of the cosmos, Atlas was background noise until the night it decided to sing. It happened in silence. Telescopes tracking its slow arc suddenly caught a flash that didn't belong. Not the soft reflection of sunlight, but a knife-edged ray of coherence. A single unbroken beam of light stabbing across millions of kilometers. It wasn't random. It wasn't diffuse. It locked on, straight toward Mars. For a heartbeat, the red planet shimmered beneath a distant spotlight, as though the universe itself had blinked. At first, no one believed the data. The signal was too sharp, too deliberate. Light doesn't act like that. Comets don't act like that. Yet every observatory, every instrument, confirmed the same impossible truth. An ancient rock had just fired a beam of precision light through space. It didn't flicker. It didn't fade. It held its aim with mechanical focus, as though guided by intent. For centuries, humanity had been the one doing the looking, turning our telescopes outward, hoping for a sign that we weren't alone. But on that October night, the tables turned. The cosmos looked back. Somewhere in that beam, something had changed, a message written not in words, but in physics itself. What if this wasn't a coincidence of chemistry? What if this was the first deliberate gesture from beyond our solar silence? The moment the void decided to say hello. What would you think if the universe suddenly blinked first? Comment your thoughts below, because as the beam faded and the stars reclaimed their stillness, one question lingered in every observatory, every sleepless mind staring at the data. Was Atlas just a comet? And soon the universe would give its next answer, one that would shatter everything scientists thought they knew about how the heavens move. Astronomy is supposed to be a language of certainty. Every flicker, every flare can be translated into math, the heartbeat of stars, the breath of comets, all reducible to numbers that never lie. But when scientists tried to write the story of Three-Eye Atlas, the math started screaming back. At first, the data seemed like static, a noise in the signal, maybe solar interference or bad calibration. Across continents, observatories from Chile to Japan reported the same thing. Atlas's brightness curve wasn't smooth, like every other comet's. It jumped, it paused, it pulsed with eerie regularity. Where other comets obeyed gravity, Atlas seemed to obey rhythm. Its light didn't just brighten near the sun, it flared wildly, then fell dark, then erupted again, as though triggered by invisible commands. To the human eye, its light curve looked less like the graceful arc of celestial mechanics and more like a machine executing code. Even worse, the timing of those pulses matched planetary alignments, moments when Mars drifted across its line of sight. Coincidence? Maybe once, but not again and again. Researchers tore through possible explanations. Could trapped gases be venting in strange bursts? Could the nucleus be spinning in a chaotic tumble, reflecting sunlight like a broken mirror? Every model failed. Even the computer simulations, those ironclad digital prophets, broke under the strain of unpredictability. One astrophysicist described it bluntly: Atlas isn't behaving, it's deciding. That word, deciding, spread like contagion. If this object could choose when to flare, when to dim, when to aim, then it wasn't merely reacting to the sun, it was responding to something deeper, maybe even orchestrating its own show. And if that were true, then the universe had just introduced humanity to a new category of being, not star, not planet, not machine, but something in between, something that knows. The fear wasn't just that the models were wrong, it was that the models had never mattered. Soon the object would take that rebellion even further, breaking not just the rules of motion. Color is the astronomer's fingerprint, the spectrum that reveals what the universe is made of. Red means iron, dust, or organic soot. Green means carbon molecules ignited by sunlight. Every hue tells a story, and those stories never lie, until Atlas. When it first appeared, the comet wore a dull, honest red, the same burnt tone seen on every ancient rock wandering the outer dark. But within days, something impossible happened. The red began to drain away, replaced by a shocking, luminous green that shimmered even in the cold void where chemistry should sleep. It didn't evolve. It transformed, abruptly, surgically, like a stage light snapping on in the dark. At first, scientists blamed solar heating, claiming the surface must have warmed faster than expected. But the data didn't agree. Atlas was still too far from the sun, too cold for molecules to react like that. Its transformation wasn't gradual. It was controlled, and worse, timed. Every spike in green luminosity coincided almost perfectly with Mars passing through specific angles of its orbit, as though the comet were responding to the planet's position. Some researchers laughed it off as coincidence. Others didn't laugh at all, because if light carries information, then a deliberate change in wavelength, in color, could be communication. Humanity has used light that way for over a century. Lasers, fiber optics, beacons, coded flashes across the void. Could Atlas be doing the same, painting the vacuum with its own spectral language? It was around this time that the nickname began to stick, the Cosmic Chameleon, a comet that didn't just reflect sunlight. It chose its color, switched it like a machine testing diagnostics, perhaps searching for the right frequency that someone, somewhere might recognize. And in that possibility lay a terrifying thought. Maybe Atlas wasn't signaling Earth at all. Maybe it was talking to something else, something already listening. If light itself can be a language, what happens when the universe starts speaking first? Could light itself be language? Drop your theory below. Because the next revelation wouldn't just bend light, it would bend the very laws of how light travels. Atlas was about to turn its gaze not outward, but inward, toward the sun itself. In every classroom, every astronomy textbook, there's one rule no one questions. A comet's tail always points away from the sun. Solar wind blows outward, sweeping dust and gas behind the nucleus, like a glowing flag of surrender. It's as fundamental as gravity itself. But 3i Atlas didn't care about rules. It pointed its light directly toward the sun. The first images were dismissed as misreadings, camera glare, optical alignment errors, tricks of geometry. But when data from Hubble and the Gemini Observatory arrived, disbelief turned to panic. The images matched perfectly. A spear of pure light extending from Atlas's nucleus, thrusting sunward. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't dust. It was deliberate. The beam held its shape across millions of kilometers, crisp-edged and unwavering, as though it refused to scatter. In physics, that's impossible. Light disperses, particles spread, yet Atlas's beam stayed narrow, surgical, coherent, like a laser. To sustain that kind of structure, something had to be guiding it, controlling it, maybe even powering it. Some astronomers began to whisper what others feared to say out loud. Maybe this wasn't a tail at all. Maybe it was propulsion or transmission. Perhaps Atlas wasn't running from the sun, but feeding on it. Imagine that, a vessel turning toward the star, not to burn, but to drink. A technology capable of transforming sunlight into thrust, communication, or energy. The geometry made too much sense to ignore. The beam's axis aligned almost perfectly with Mars's orbital path, as if pre-calculated to intersect the planet's position days later. It was choreography, not chaos. If Atlas were alive, it had just performed a maneuver that no human spacecraft could dream of. If it were artificial, then we had just witnessed interstellar engineering in motion, a civilization so old and confident that it could sculpt starlight like clay. Either way, the universe had changed forever, because in that moment, humanity realized we were no longer observing a comet at all. We were watching a decision, an act of intention made across the void. If this were technology, who or what built it? Comment your guess below. And as the world's telescopes locked on, the next wave of discoveries would prove even more heretical. This wasn't just a mechanical mystery, it was chemical blasphemy. When scientists broke down the light from 3i Atlas into its spectral components, they expected the usual chemical chorus: water, dust, a dash of carbon monoxide. Instead, what came back was wrong, deeply wrong. Atlas wasn't wet. It was dry, almost entirely composed of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, with barely a whisper of water. To anyone who's ever studied comets, that's like finding a snowball made of smoke. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it got. The metallic readings revealed a purity that nature should never allow, nickel without iron. Anywhere else in the universe, those two elements are inseparable twins, forged together in the hearts of dying stars. Yet here, nickel stood alone, refined, isolated, clean. That word refined stuck in the minds of researchers, because refinement is what industry does, not nature. To separate metals so precisely requires method, design, purpose. Some theorists began to whisper that maybe Atlas wasn't formed in a distant star system at all, but built there, constructed from materials meant to endure radiation, regulate heat, or manipulate light itself. Then came the spectral lines, those thin glowing fingerprints every element leaves in its light, except these didn't match anything known. Not one molecule, not one atomic structure cataloged in the periodic table fit the pattern. It was like reading a passport stamped with symbols from no known country. The comet was made of matter that shouldn't exist, or worse, matter that didn't want to be recognized. Even its gas ratios behaved too perfectly. The balance between carbon monoxide and dioxide never drifted, as though something were actively maintaining it. A feedback loop, a regulator, a system that refused to obey entropy. That's when the language of the scientists began to shift. They stopped calling it a comet and started calling it an object, because if these readings were real, then Atlas wasn't just breaking the laws of chemistry, it was rewriting them. To the boldest minds, the conclusion was inescapable. This wasn't an accident of geology, it was design, the first known artifact of cosmic engineering. And that realization didn't just challenge our understanding of the universe, it challenged our place in it. Soon one voice would rise to say what others were afraid to even think. A man who'd been here before, dismissed once for daring to ask the same forbidden question, what if it's not natural? When the data first reached Harvard, most researchers quietly filed it under unexplained anomalies. But one scientist didn't. Avi Loeb, the same astrophysicist who once suggested that our first interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, might be artificial, saw in Atlas the echoes of his own exiled idea. He'd been mocked before for calling a rock a relic. This time, the evidence mocked everyone else. Loeb began connecting the dots others avoided. The rhythmic light bursts, the anomalous chemistry, the beam that locked onto Mars, none of it fit a natural model. But if Atlas were a machine, suddenly everything aligned. The fluctuations weren't random flares, but deliberate actions. Energy management, signaling, propulsion. The material composition wasn't strange geology, it was engineered resilience. Atlas, he proposed, might not be a comet at all, but a technological flagship, a craft older than human civilization, crossing the stars in patient silence. He went further. What if those periodic flares weren't chemical eruptions, but controlled emissions, data packets, bursts of power, or the ignition of smaller devices? Perhaps Atlas wasn't traveling alone. Perhaps it was deploying something. Tiny autonomous probes, invisible to us, scattering through the solar system like cosmic spores. The hypothesis sounded insane until the data supported it. The timing of each flare matched a subtle shift in trajectory, almost like a vessel adjusting its course. The forward beam's geometry aligned precisely with orbital intersections near Mars. And the materials, the pure nickel, the carbon matrices, could in theory withstand extreme radiation, regulate temperature, and conduct light with surgical precision. To Loeb, this wasn't coincidence. It was design language. Atlas was behaving like a craft performing reconnaissance. Approach, emit, observe, retreat. Its silence wasn't absence, it was strategy. Still, Loeb was careful. He ended every paper with the same phrase, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. But beneath that caution lay something else, a quiet certainty that refusing to look would be the greater failure. For centuries, humanity had begged the cosmos for a reply. Maybe this was it, not a voice, but a beam of light disguised as stone. Is this science or science fiction coming true? Share your thoughts below. Because as Loeb's hypothesis gained traction, another mystery began to unfold, one that no telescope could explain. Atlas had started to disappear. For a while, 3I Atlas seemed to linger in plain sight, its orbit steady, its light steady. its enigma steady. Then, as if obeying a higher script, it began to drift into a position every astronomer dreads: solar conjunction. That's the moment when an object slips behind the sun from Earth's perspective, swallowed by glare so intense that even our best telescopes go blind. For weeks, Atlas would be invisible, hidden in the one place the universe itself refuses to let us look. At first, it was routine. Comets often vanished behind the sun, only to re-emerge later. But with Atlas, the timing was too precise. Orbital simulations showed that it reached conjunction just as it absorbed maximum solar energy, a perfect opportunity to recharge, recalibrate, or simply vanish from every instrument we own. To a physicist, that's coincidence. To an engineer, it's strategy. Then came the silence. NASA, the European Space Agency, and China's CNSA all stopped releasing telemetry data within days of each other, citing instrument recalibration or temporary communication gaps. But internal logs leaked by amateur observers told a different story. The satellites were fine, their sensors working perfectly. The blackout wasn't mechanical, it was deliberate. Behind the sun, Atlas was unseen, unreachable, and for the first time unaccounted for. If Loeb was right, if the object had intent, then this was the ideal move. Hide in plain sight, power up while your watchers stare into their own blindness. It was as if the cosmos itself had turned the page, and humanity wasn't allowed to read the next chapter. Some astronomers joked uneasily that Atlas had found the blind spot of God, but others stopped laughing when they realized the pattern. Every cycle, every adjustment, every burst of light seemed to lead to this moment, the maneuver behind the star. If a comet can anticipate our line of sight, manage power, and use the sun as camouflage, then it isn't a comet, it's a tactician. And when it reemerges, the world will be waiting, wondering not just where it went, but what it became while we weren't looking.